if any of you have any questions. Can all of you hear me okay?
Yes.
Good, good. Okay, so the purpose of our topic for today is to really look at the kind of the way the role of educational office professionals is changing, and I should probably say changed in most cases, because it's actually happened already, but it's kind of an evolving issue. What are some of the drivers behind that, and what are some of the ways that you can kind of prepare yourself to be more effective in that role as the role is changing? So I actually like this first slide. I had gone to a workshop a long time ago, and I saw somebody had posted this, and they just said, don't wait for your ship to come in, swim out to greet it. The most successful people in all jobs are the people who anticipate change that's about to come, and they take whatever is necessary steps to prepare to be ready for that change. And I think that's really central to, if there's anything that I'm trying to sell as an argument for this webinar, it's that, you need to kind of be proactive in what you do. So, and that one of my favorite things, again, is people say, well, I'll try to be it. But, my favorite saying from Yoda, Master Yoda, is do or do not, there is no try. You just have to really do it. So nobody knows exactly what the future is going to hold for any of us. Change is an uncertain thing, but there are certain aspects that we're beginning to see as trends, or actually that have kind of already happened, and that are continuing to happen, that have an impact on educational office professionals. And one of those is tighter budgets. Obviously, all of you are from New York, and you're aware of the cap, and even though things are starting to get a little loosening up from the shock of the recession, I still think that in a lot of cases, the new reality is that money is going to be tighter, and that people are sharpening their pencils constantly and looking for ways to save money. Now, the good news is that we really haven't seen this, for the most part, impacting on the levels of staffing for office staff, principally because most of districts were already lean beforehand. Even in the years before the recession, which, goodness, is already like, oh my God, it's almost on a decade ago. But even prior to 2008 and 2009, when we were still kind of okay financially, districts were already pretty lean. They had been cutting down on office staff to try to save teachers' jobs and keep budgets low. So by the point that we hit the recession, we didn't really see a lot of cuts, because there really wasn't much area to cut in the office staff ranks, because most districts are lean already. But that doesn't necessarily mean that districts aren't sharpening their pencils in other ways that have an impact on educational office professionals. And in fact, most of the impact that's coming to educational office professionals is not so much cuts from their ranks, but cuts from the middle management ranks in districts. So it's just very interesting. Not too long ago, I had a colleague of mine who's in this, I think they're already administrator, but they were aspiring to change positions, and they kind of had a choice between two positions. One of them was a position as a principal of a building, and the other one was kind of a middle management position in central office, a director of ELA. And my advice to the person, who I really much would prefer to do the director of ELA position, just in terms of temperament. But my advice to her was to take the position in at the building level as principals, because as districts have gotten leaner, what they've done is gutted a lot of the middle management positions in central office. And as a result, and even at the building level, we've seen some gutting as well. You're going to need a principal to run a building, but we have situations where before there was an AP in a building, and now they don't have an AP in some elementary buildings. or they may have had a full-time AP, and now they've got an AP being shared between two buildings. So the real change that's impacting on educational office professionals is that a lot of the tasks that were traditionally done by it, as those positions have been eliminated, and as the responsibility of those positions have been absorbed by other administrators, they've ended up relying on educational office professionals to assume some of the duties that might have traditionally been done by an administrator. So I would ask you that as a question. Are there some tasks that, maybe you've been asked to do in terms of project tasks that maybe in the past were not done by you? They were actually done by a middle management supervisor or by an assistant principal. Anybody? This is how I tell if you're still out there. Okay?
Definitely.
Okay. So I think a lot of stuff, right. So, of course, just because you're getting being asked to do that doesn't mean that you're going to lose any of the current tasks you have. So I'm sure that as they asked you to do these additional things, they didn't tell you all these other things you were doing before you don't have to do. Am I right?
Correct. You got that
right. You just took on what?
You got that right.
Yes. So even if your positions are not at risk, when other positions are dependent, it has an influence. And so what that's meant is just more juggling of responsibilities. Now, the good news in terms of those tasks being assigned to educational office professionals is that some of those tasks are interesting. They provide variety in the work. So as a result, they kind of make the work more fulfilling. The bad part is that you don't get to give up the old stuff. So it means heavier workloads, the need to be a little bit more creative about how you do all of the jobs you do. So that, and just how you juggle the balls in the air. And so if there's one kind of defining, responsibility that comes of that additional burden is the need to work a little bit smarter and be smarter about how you do your work. And one of the areas where people have gotten pretty smart has been just by learning how to be a little bit more creative in the use of technology and handling time better and thinking out of the box about some of those things. So if we're going to look at, what characteristics it takes to be highly effective in an environment where the job is evolving, where there's a lot of responsibility to take on tasks you might not have previously had to do and all of that, I think you can define that really in terms of three basic, how should we say, areas to look at to be successful. And those three areas are organizationally savvy, technologically savvy, and people savvy. So the most successful people have all of those skills. Those are three different areas. So we're kind of just going to look at some of that, okay, and what they are. So let me talk about that just briefly. So what's examples of organizationally savvy? Organizationally savvy, I would say, is where you have relationships with people within the organization, where you know its structure so that you know how to maximize or say minimize the potential for people to take advantage of you, and also maximize your ability to work the levers. So, so in a way, you can almost think of that as people savvy as well. But, when a person just has more understanding of who they can get what from, which things they can say no to, what things you can even not do, that kind of would all come under organizational savvy. Technologically savvy, I think that's the obvious one. And there are just a lot of different things that are out there today that, offer some possibility. One of the ones is one we did last week, which is using tools like Evernote or being a little bit more creative about a lot of the work that I've been doing lately, and I'll do that in the next slide, is kind of moving towards paperless operations. Last week I was in central New York, and I was meeting with an HR department. And one of the things that they've just done over the last couple of years is spent a lot of work getting all of the forms and things that people need, not just online, but also having them as PDF fill-in forms so that people can complete them with a typewriter rather than complete them handwritten, which was creating an enormous burden because they were illegible or they were incomplete. So they spent a lot of time this year taking all of their forms and using Adobe Writer and turning them into fill-in forms with drop-down menus. And there's still some people that submit stuff by paper, but it's reduced the load for them. And before they used to have to keep copies of applications and things, and all of that's now been cleared out. And then, paper savvy, just having a little bit, and that's really about the relationships you establish. And I'm going to talk about some strategies around that as well. So again, one of the things that I think really is an important area to look at today, because, it's interesting. You really can't change the amount of hours in the day. You can work a little bit more overtime, but that eventually wears you down. You really can't change workload that much. So one of the only ones that's a lever is our ability to use technology more effectively. And I really think going paperless. How many of you are kind of moving in the paperless direction? Anybody?
Not as fast as I'd like to see it move.
Uh-huh. Well, I can just give you, a bit of advice on that. And obviously we're just doing a general thing here, but one thing that I did that was really helpful is I actually, and you have to lobby for this, but, getting a desktop scanner goes a long way. Even a scanner that's like part of your copier in some cases may not really do the job. If you have it right in front of you and you can, this year I worked with a facilities department and I convinced the director to get one for himself and one for his secretary. And now every single piece of paper that comes in, they just immediately scan it and get rid of the paper. And it's just reduced the amount of clutter enormously. I think you also have to figure out a way to connect it with the web or with the cloud as well. And then don't try to do it retroactively. Try to do it prospectively. So we did a study last year of an HR department, and they were just buried in papers. Just buried. And I think they really wanted to go paperless, but they just really felt like they just could not. It was just an impossible and endless job to do. So our solution was to only do paperless going forward, not to try to scan all the old stuff. And we actually found a company based in Atlanta that you can ship boxes to. They will scan it, send you a disc, and if you like what's on the disc, they'll destroy the paper. And we felt that in some cases, to get a head start, you have to go outside to do it. And it turned out to be not very expensive. So if you don't have the luxury of that because your district won't spring for, paying to have it archived and scanned, just think don't worry so much about the old records. Just as of a particular date, anything new that comes in. And then eventually the stuff that's old will be so old you'll be able to trash it anyway or move it off site, And it can really also be very helpful in time management with administrators too. Because in a number of the efficiency studies that I'm doing, we're looking at how to improve collaboration between the administrator and office staff. And we have many of those administrators, they're out and about at meetings. Most of them have some sort of either a laptop or mobile device, a tablet. And so by putting documents in the cloud, we've been able to improve interactions between the office staff and secretary getting stuff done. So I'll just give you a specific example of that. I worked with a facilities department last year, and the director who was really out in the field all day long, used to complain that he'd come back to a pile of stuff that he had to sign off on his desk. And by the way, this was a source of frustration for a secretary as well, because people were calling all day long saying, when are you going to get this done? When is this going to get signed, et cetera? So I actually put him on Dropbox. I put his secretary also on Dropbox. on a shared folder. And what she's doing now is most of the stuff he needed to do was purchase orders that he needed to approve. Now, the district is still paper. We would love to do this all automated, but that wasn't going to happen, and you can't wait around if you're going to be proactive for other people to get ready. You got to do your end. So what we started to do was every time a purchase order would come in, she would scan it, and she would put it into a shared folder that they had on the cloud called To Be Signed, that her administrator could then pick up. Now, he was out and about all day long, but it doesn't mean he didn't have a little time in between. Maybe he got to a meeting a little early, or there was a meeting that he just needed to do. How should we say, he had to be there, but really wasn't that much of it involving him. And what he would do is he had a tablet. He also had a big smartphone. And he would pick it up. He would open up, whenever he had an extra minute, he'd open up the documents that were in there. He'd review them and sign them, and then he'd transfer them to another folder that was signed. And then what his secretary would do is she would look in the signed folder, and anything that had been signed by him, she would print a copy, and the business office agreed to accept it if it was stapled on top of the paper copies. And what was happening is stuff was getting done sooner. He wasn't coming back to a pile. She wasn't getting calls, when is he going to sign that? So those are examples where paperless is not just about reducing space. It's also about getting things done faster. So any questions just on paperless? This just to make sure you're still out there.
No questions.
No, good. Okay. So the other thing, again, is just doing good planning, and collaborating with your boss and working effectively as a team with other office staff. One of the things that a lot of the work that I've done in the last few years about has been, even sometimes in districts, the central office is silos. So you have one department where, their crunch period, they're overwhelmed, and you got another department where people are sitting around, and while they have work, they don't have a lot of work. So looking at things like, I'll help you through your crunch period, you help me through mine. By the way, the key to working with crunch periods is what you do when you don't have a crunch period, and the planning. So just this idea of establishing the kind of relationships where, someone's going to be willing to team with you. And my only general advice in that area is, you kind of have to, there's no guarantee that if you give, you will receive, but it has to start with a giver. So if you offer to help people when they're under their burden, there's a good chance that a good portion of them will return the favor. So the idea is, in your people savvy is looking for opportunities to help people out when they're in a bind, and then have a hope that a good portion of that will do the same. If they don't, then you'll stop doing it. But certainly, you got to start that way. Another thing that's a big driver, and I almost could have talked about the paperless in relation to this issue as well, is that with all of these additional mandates and drivers operating within schools, what it's meant is that administrators' role is changing as well. And again, this is probably one where you could fairly say this role has changed already. But if you had looked at the role of a typical administrator, say 25 years ago, the job was largely a desk-bound job, even principal. It was largely a desk-bound job. People came to you. And today the culture is a moving around culture. And in fact, this creates an enormous pressure on administrators as well. They're spending the majority of their time away from their office, and that creates just a number of problems. Number one, they're not accessible to people, so therefore when people have problems, they tend to lay those problems more on office staff than they would have in the time when you would have just transferred them in. And so the need to have better PR skills, has kind of become part of the job, as you have to kind of calm people down and get them used to the idea that they're not going to get immediate access. And then also there are just the issues of how we collaborate at a distance. And how many of you would say that that's the case? You have less time during a typical day with FaceTime with your administrator than you may have had, say, a decade ago. Is that true?
Yes.
Again, wait for me to tell if you're there. I guess you're the spokesperson for the group.
I guess so.
I guess so. So in all of that, there really are some opportunities to lead. There are all kinds of skill subsets that you need that you might not have needed before. Just even the idea of an administrator being out more, changing your role. So if you are an executive secretary and you're working for a boss that's typically available most of the time, a lot more of the stuff's going to get fielded by your boss. If you've got a boss that's never around, that means that you're the one that's going to have to try to problem solve and handle a lot of difficulties for customers where you can that might have otherwise been handled by an administrator. So that's kind of one. And then in cases where you can't do it, having the kinds of skills that are going to calm people down is going to be important. And with that comes, positive benefits. I love this saying. I think it's so true. If you're not the lead dog, the scenery never changes. So I had a lot of people that were not very happy with office work because they felt it had become too routine. And I don't think there are too many people today who see it as too routine. The job is too frenetic and too changing in most cases. So the very fact that we have all of these new challenges, that kind of can add fulfillment to the work, but not without its burdens. So the question becomes, how can you position yourself, to be a little bit more effective in your leadership role? And I think part of it is you got to overcome fear. Whenever you're going to take on a new task, there's always going to be some anxiety about it. That's true for administrators as well. You've got to just kind of push through it. A lot of the fear, by the way, that I hear among office staff is not so much fear in that I'm not going to be competent in doing it. It's more fear that other people are not going to respect me in that role. So when you start to take on some jobs that used to be done by administrators and you have to interact with teachers, you have to interact with stakeholders, are they going to, will they really respond to you? And I believe that they will if you act like a bulldog and, assert that, that's your role as opposed to being a fox. And in some cases, you may need to talk to you may also need to talk to your administrator about some of those areas. And so that comes to the question of managing up. Many secretaries say, part of the frustration in office staff of the job is, if I could work alone, I'd be fine, but I'm in this, dependent or relationship with an administrator, and their poor skills, the lack of planning or not communicating with me creates burdens for me. How many of you would say that's the case? I know I'll get my one person speaking for the group.
No, that's not the case with me.
Oh, that's not the case with you. Okay, but you understand what I'm talking about, right? At least as a concept, It's like because you're not, whenever you have to work with others, especially work with a boss, whatever they're weak at. So one example I've heard from office staff a lot is, I have a boss that procrastinates on some report, and then they work behind closed scenes to finish it, and then it's at the 11th hour, and all of a sudden the pressure's on me. If they had, given me a little bit more of a heads up, I might have been able to help them with some of the preliminary stuff. It would have taken some of the pressure off of me. So one of the biggest challenges is managing up. How do you manage your boss without appearing to be arrogant or not being in your place? So I would say the answer to managing up is to ask good questions, because questions drive everything. So, for example, even in the training that I do on time management, I often recommend if you're feeling like you have too much to do, asking a boss, look, I'm looking at my list. I think I have more things to do than time would permit. In what order do you want me to do these? Well, which are your 5 most important ones? So that takes off the pressure. So constantly asking good questions, as opposed to you should, often drives the administrator to come up with the answers, yet it doesn't feel threatening. Just in general, when it comes to questions, one of the things that's going to allow you to be more effective a leader is if you can build authority. So what is building authority? Essence, it's where you've reached the point where an administrator has that much confidence in you that you no longer have to come to them for permission to do this or approval for this. They've just assumed that you can handle it. And that's obviously tied and connected with trust. I once had an administrator ask me a question, what is it appropriate for my office staff to do? And my answer was, it depends on the person. I think there's a couple of things that are probably politically not good for them to do. You know, I don't think you'd want to have your office staff member substituting for you at a school board meeting. Not that they probably couldn't handle it, but it might not be politically good for you to appear as if you're not doing it. But, you know, with respect to any projects and tasks, I think it's all a question of who the person is and what relationship you've established. So it's a question of building the trust. I think oftentimes because it's not so much that we're in conflict, but we kind of don't go to the elephant under the tent. You know, I don't want to ask you because I might think you would consider that unreasonable, and you don't want to offer because you don't want to appear as if you're trying to be controlling. So because of that, we never kind of address the issue, or we never, you know, clarify that. So I just have some general advice on what I think are always good questions. You should always, well, here, maybe I can almost put a preface on this. If you ever get beaten up for maybe overstepping your authority, let's assume you assumed that your administrator would be fine with this, and all of a sudden you got your head handed to you for maybe overstepping your bounds, or the other way around, there was an assumption that you would handle something or take care of it and you didn't. I always recommend going back to these kind of fundamental ground questions, you know. And the way you could, by the way, if you ever are, you know, challenged for, say, having overstepped your bounds, my first recommendation would be to just say, well, it certainly wasn't my intention to, you know, overstep my bounds. But it would be really helpful if we had some clarification of some things so it doesn't happen in the future. So here's just a kind of a little generalized list, and I'll send all of you a copy of these slides as well as a link to the recording after we finish the series. I'm going to just set it up as another scheduled meeting. It'll say no meeting. The links will be in there so everybody will have it. But the questions are, what do you want me to ask you before I act? In other words, where do I need permission? Don't do these things without specific permission. What do you want me to inform you about after I've acted? So it's not a question of I need your permission to do it, but there may be situations where when I make a decision, you need to be in the loop that it's been made, you know, or what happened or what decision I made. And then what do you want me to just handle? And not keep you in the loop at all. And now when you have a meeting or discussion with your boss with these authorities questions, let's say you were just hired new even and you just want to answer these questions, there's absolutely no way you can, in a comprehensive and complete and total way, you get an answer to these because every situation is a little bit different. So I think it's something that you kind of just build up as a foundation and groundwork over time. Certainly, if you work with someone for a really long time, you're going to get the answers to all of these questions by default. Every time you overstep your bounds, they're going to say, you did that? And eventually you're going to get there. But I think asking them proactively is a way that can reduce conflict and also clarify your authority. Just any questions or comments on that? Again, it's a way for me to tell if you're still there. Can you hear me?
We're still here.
Oh, good. It's so silent I can't tell. So what you're going to find in any relationship, again, with your boss. And by the way, you know, all of these things also apply if you have people that are reporting to you. So, for example, if you are the lead person and you have people that are reporting to you, I think giving them clarification about these things are helpful. So whether it's being driven by the subordinate asking the questions or the boss prompting the questions or whoever is the supervisor, I think these are important questions to get clarified. And along the same lines, whether you're the one asking the questions or you're on the other end in terms of being the one that's prompting this, I just think it's important to kind of clarify, look, these things, you can do them whatever way you want, as long as you don't break any rules. You don't do anything illegal. On this, I insist you do it my way. I want it done that way. Only my way. So whereas, on something like this, you might say in one case, I don't care whether you send out emails or you post it. This, I want a letter going out of that. I want it done this way. Okay? So that's kind of that. And then you have to, as with all of this, we've already been hinting at, you have to kind of try to work and cultivate your own development. So I want to talk a little bit about that. And again, I do think it's important to keep track of trends. One of the things that I often hear from people is, I'm a little, my environment's a little myopic. I don't get to see or know what's going on in the whole rest of the world. So I absolutely recommend that you go on the web. There are a lot of websites. If you just even do office automation, and you can just begin to find out what other people are doing. How many of you subscribe to some sort of a publication that deals with office efficiency? There are a few out there. There aren't an awful lot, but there are some. Anybody subscribing to anything like that now, where you're getting some information on what's coming down the pipe, what are the new technologies? Yes, no?
No.
So that's my advice. And to just set goals around this. So I'll just give you an example of one goal. I had a secretary, definitely an up-and-comer, very motivated. And she said, I make it my goal to learn one new thing in the Microsoft Office suite every week. Doesn't have to be a big thing, but I try to learn one new thing. And oftentimes she says she goes on YouTube and looks at YouTube videos. So one thing may be how to do mail merge, or it may be something with formatting, or a little bit innovative way to use Outlook, something like that. But she just says, I try to take only about 5 or 10 minutes and try to kind of just put one more tool in my toolbox each week so I can enhance my skills and therefore enhance my efficiency, learn how to solve some problems in different ways. So again, just as I had mentioned the three areas, one way to look at potential goals, again, is knowledge and technical goals, organizational goals, and relationship goals. So, and again, I just had already talked about this. By the way, YouTube is an absolutely fabulous tool. I have been right now I'm in the middle of doing a series. Fortunately, I'm not doing all of them. But we're doing a series for New York State ASBO it's actually Excel Intermediate. We had done tips and tricks on Excel. So we're kind of digging a little bit deeper. It's actually 4 one-hour sessions, and I'm doing 2 of them. And so I'm in the process of preparing. I spent most of the day yesterday preparing for one that's at the end of the month. And it's actually in Excel on how to work with multiple worksheets and how to summarize the information. And the way I learned the stuff that I'm covering is by watching YouTube videos. I set up YouTube on my iPad, and I had Excel out, and I've just been taking notes from various things saying, ooh, that's good, I want that. So I didn't have to buy any books. I didn't have to spend any money, something I probably would have done a decade ago. And actually it was better because I actually could see how they did it. On any of the technology areas, YouTube's terrific. And all of it's for free. So what are some organizational goals that you can have for yourself besides technological goals? And I would say some of those things where you can establish kind of an organizational goal is to serve on a committee, offer to help on a special project as part of a project team. Kind of develop yourself as a resident expert. So I've been working with this district in Connecticut, and the superintendent secretaries really become good at doing newsletters. And so I don't think this was originally part of her job, but she's kind of beginning to manage aspects of their website. She's got tabs on the website with newsletter tabs, and she's really handling that. And that wasn't originally a skill for her, you know. So, and no one else in the district knows how to do it at that point, which makes her very valuable. And also, in some cases, depending on what your job is, looking at a cross-training situation. So if you're currently in the business office and you're working as an accounts payable clerk, but you really never do payroll, kind of learning a little bit more about payroll. This morning I was in a district, and they had 2 office staff members in the facilities department, and the director, who was just really describing the jobs, said to me, she can do her job, but she can't do her job. One of our goals is to have them a little bit more formally cross-trained so they each can spell each other. So in addition to organizational goals and technological goals, another really critical goal would be develop relationship goals. And in terms of relationship goals, it's not just the relationships within the district, which is certainly important, but also establishing relationships outside of the district, developing your own network. So one of the things that almost every administrator that I know does is they have established networks beyond their district. So say, and most of you I know are from Westchester County and Putnam County. So for example, within Westchester and Putnam County, there's a high school principals association, middle school principals association, school business, even though there's state association, ASBO, there's a local Lower Hudson chapter. There's also a little core chapter that meets with all of the districts in Putnam. All of the facilities directors have their association. So why are these associations? What's the benefit? Well, people get to meet people from other districts. They get to ask them questions. How do you solve this problem? What do you do about this? So they have they've established rapport and relationship with peers in other places outside of their districts through a professional association. So here's an interesting question. How many of you are members of the New York State Association of Educational Office Professionals? Anybody?
No, we're not, but we were just actually talking about this just before you brought it, that we want to join this organization.
Okay, so at least you're aware it exists, right?
Yeah, you brought it up another time, too. That's why I just was thinking about it, and then you just so happened to bring it on the screen.
Well, I can give you a little bit of information. First of all, they have a website, and actually this year they are doing a conference, and it is the national conference is going to be in the Buffalo area, I believe in June. But they also do they do a statewide conference at least once a year. And some of them are closer, some of them are on the other end of the state. But I think it's just it's very inexpensive, the dues. It's terrific in terms of relationship, because then if you're ever facing a situation in your district and you just want to contact a few people and ask, what are they doing in your district about this? You have some opportunity to talk to people about that. Now, this is not the only way to do this. We certainly have some other examples of this, and I wish there would be more. So, for example, I know that at one time, Putnam North and Westchester Post is pretty good about having a superintendent's group, the secretaries group. I don't know if that's anybody here a superintendent secretary?
Yeah, one of us are here.
Yeah, and I think that group used to do training once a year. Am I right? And I think it's kind of like on the wayside.
It's on the wayside. They still do board clerks.
Yeah, and they still do the district clerks, correct.
Yeah.
So that's one group. So I would like to see, maybe that happen again, And if we, we've certainly had our conversations at Putnam about wanting to be willing to, encourage that and facilitate that. It kind of dropped off the radar screen again when the economy got tight, and then we've had a lot of retirements and changes. So I think it'd be a good example of revisiting. And, sometimes you just got to do it yourself. Nothing wrong with getting on the phone and calling your neighboring district and just saying, hi, I am. If you ever have a question, you can give me a call. This is my name, And so I encourage people to call people from other districts around them. I was working with someone in Brentwood, and Brentwood's a very large district on Long Island. There are like these 3 or 4 districts in the state that are really large. They're so large, they're almost as big as the Big Five, Buffalo, Rochester, Syracuse. So one of them is Brentwood on Long Island. The other one is Clarkstown in Rockland. And you have like Greece Central in the Rochester area. These are all districts that are literally as big as Yonkers, almost as big. And so I've encouraged people who work in those very large districts, because large districts have large district issues structurally. Nothing wrong with calling somebody in the other district and just introducing themselves. I mean, the worst they can do is hang up on you. But in a lot of cases, people are interested in doing that. So the professional association can facilitate that, but even if it's just a question of developing your own small local networks, I think it's really an important way, and to think about that as a goal, the idea of cultivating relationships. So I'm going to skip that and kind of, again, one of the issues that I often hear with this is, not letting, if I'm going to take on these responsibilities, are people going to respect me in that role? And, I think if you act timidly, people will treat you timidly. If you act like you're in charge, they'll treat you like you're in charge. I mean, at the end of the day, all of our authority flows from the same place. It all flows from the top, passes down. So when when you've been assigned a task to do by an administrator, you have the power of that administrator behind you. If you act like you don't have it, people will certainly take that to their advantage. So I think it's important to develop an air of authority and to, not focus so much on yourself, but really focus on the task at hand. Probably the last, piece of this, is because so much of your role is a frontline role in almost all of the jobs. There's certainly some jobs in it, as educational office professionals that aren't super frontline, like in the business office. But the bulk of the jobs are frontline in that you're interacting with, well, even those jobs are frontline in that you're interacting with internal stakeholders. A lot of the job involves working with both external and certainly in some cases internal, but more external stakeholders. And so a large part of your role is one of diplomacy skills. And so I just want to, kind of talk to you about an organization, give a little shout out to them. And that's Chase. Anybody bank with Chase?
I do. It's the best bank.
Okay. Tell me why you think it's the best bank.
I love the service. I think one of the greatest ideas was to open a branch within a food supermarket, because that's basically where I do my banking now.
Okay.
I think that was a great idea, whoever came up with that. I just like all the online features and.
So I'm going to tell you a little bit about the back end of the Chase deal. Okay. So everything you say reinforces what I'm going to say about Chase, okay? So Chase has decided that they want the retail business. They want to dominate it. They literally want to capture it, okay? And so they began to look at this issue of banking in general, and they asked themselves, because to a certain extent, banking, is a commodity in a sense that today pretty much everybody the rates are pretty much the rates, and checking is checking. You know what I mean? A CD is a CD. So the question becomes, how can you really differentiate yourself, one bank from another, that's going to make people want to go to you? So they concluded there are only two things that really matter. Hours, well, three things. Hours, location, and service. Okay? So we'll start with hours. Chase has a policy. When they open up a bank in an area, they check to see what the hours of every bank is in the area, and they beat it. So if all the other local banks close at 4, they close at 5. That's Chase's philosophy. It's almost like we will not be undersold on hours. Okay? The second is availability of branches, having branches, as many branches as possible so people don't have to travel far. We can make it as convenient as possible. So they were determined to beat everybody on branches. And then the last one is service. They provide so much service, sometimes it's obnoxious, but they fall over you with service. Would you agree? Every time I don't hear from you, I check to see if you're still around. Can everybody hear me?
We're still here.
Right. So they literally fall over you with service. Okay. If you look like you're taking too long to fill out your deposit slip, they'll come over and offer to help with the number. And it isn't because they just happen to have good staff. They are drumming it into their staff that this is the critical. They get points and scores for how many people they keep. And so the staff it's drummed into them. Go out of your way for customers.
That actually happened to me yesterday. I went to the Chase branch that's within the AMP near where we work, and I was waiting online to deposit a check, and the manager came over to me, so I was waiting and said, I'll show you how to do it through the ATM, which I know I'm behind the times, but I've never done. So he walked me through it, and now I know how to do that.
Exactly. So this is part of the culture training at Chase. So I always bring it up because we can learn a lot of lessons from this. I mean, it's hard for us to give the same level of service that demands, but this notion of you beat people out. You imagine what their service is in other places, and you give them better service. So one of the areas that I would say is, in the school business, so to speak, is, we're trying to compete with people's experience in the corporate world. And in the corporate world today, with the exception of places that give good service like Chase, as you know, any place you call, you don't get a human. You get a machine. And I'm not opposed to automated attendance, but it seems to me like when to call an industry, it's almost like they don't want you to talk to a person. Like they'll do anything to have you not talk to a person because people cost money and machines don't. So they just make it hard for you to get to a person. So we want to make sure that we're the opposite of that, and so making sure that people can get transferred to the right places and get good service and they get a human is really important. And not only that they get a human, but they get a human who can break down silos. So if you're a small district, obviously the issues of silos are going to be less of an issue than if you're a large district where there are going to be, by its nature, more silos. But I think this is one of the areas where highly effective leadership can go a long way. If you become a person who's really organizationally savvy and know not just what you do, but what everybody does, you're going to be in a much better position if you have a customer that has a problem to be able to direct them to the right place efficiently and to assist them in that process. So that's kind of where your role is, to break down the silo. And just this notion that, it is your role to cut the red tape. This, again, is where Chase is really good. You're having a problem with an application, they're going to sit with you and help and make it easier for you. You're having a problem with your online, they're going to make it easier for you, not make it harder for you. So I think that's a large part of our role. Are there ways that we can streamline even everything from requisition forms to any kind of a process that people have to undertake to make it easier, to make it user-friendly, to make it better? That's kind of where a lot of the goal has been. And that you're just generally a positive force. People, if they have a problem, they look forward to calling you as opposed to dreading calling you, because They know that not only even if the problem is their fault, you're going to be unflappable. You're not going to be somebody that makes them feel bad or that feels annoyed. So the question becomes, how do you really begin? I think like anything else, you really have to reflect and try to establish goals. What are some areas, what are some areas that you can now explore? Is an area that where I'm a little weak? Is it in not having established good relationships with potential peers in my area or statewide? Is it that I'm not keeping up on technology by not kind of learning the new things? Is it that I really haven't served on a committee or done anything where I've gotten a chance to learn more about the district? And you can't do all of it at once, but just picking a couple of areas that you think will be a goal for the year, and then to cultivate it, and to take whatever efforts are necessary to make that happen. So the question becomes, what's your next steps? And so that's it. And how do you like that? Just about on the hour. Any questions, any thoughts, anything anybody wants to ask before we wrap up?
I have a question, Jeff.
Sure.
We need to have someone come in to do Word and Excel PD for the office staff.
Okay.
Do you do that, or can you recommend someone, or?
Well, let me ask that question. Yeah. Well, first of all, it depends on how advanced the Excel is.
It would be probably, I'm thinking, either beginner or intermediate.
If it's beginner, I could do it. Okay. Because I've gotten very good at that. If Word, I'm probably not as strong. Let me ask you a question. How would you guys feel about maybe having somebody having it done online?